They can't just like...
I'm saying that the Boy Scouts have a standard. You must be a biological boy to be a Boy Scout. You have to be a boy to be a Boy Scout.
Where's that written, though? Okay.
In the name Boy Scouts. Because this is a very because for all of human history, boy meant boy and girl meant girl. Boy did not mean girl. And if I call you a moose, are you suddenly a moose? Okay, if I redefine our terms. No, yes, that's right. Men and women are a completely different thing. This is true. Have you ever met a man or a woman? They're completely different.
Completely different thing. You can't just say you're a cat. It's not a thing. It's genders. It's not saying you're.
Okay, why is that? I don't understand. Why? Okay, let me ask you this. Okay, I won't ask you how old. I will ask you how old you are. Okay, because you're young enough that it's probably not insulting to ask you. So.
I'm 22, so I'm probably young and naive, right?
No. Why aren't you 60? Why aren't you 60?
Because it.
And why can't you identify as 60? What is the problem with you identifying as 60?
It's not the same as gender. You can't just...
You're right. Age is significantly less important than gender. You can't magically change your gender. You can't magically change your sex. You can't magically change your age.
You can still legally change it. People recognize...
You can't legally change your age, by the way.
Obviously. You can change your name, you can change your sex, you can change your identity.
Just because you can do things legally doesn't mean that they are correct biologically. You could do lots of things in the past that were incorrect biologically and correct legally. For a long period of time in the United States, sterilization of the mentally ill took place. That didn't make it okay. Skinner versus Oklahoma. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote the decision.
Right. I still don't understand how you're these children that are...
It's not a matter of open-minded and accepting. I want them to get treatment that they see fit, but that's not involving me. The idea behind the transgender movement as a civil rights movement is the idea that all of their problems would just go away if I would pretend that they were the sex to which they claim membership. That's nonsense. The transgender suicide rate is 40%. It is 40%. And according to the Anderson School at UCLA, it makes no difference. There's a study that came out last year. It makes no difference, virtually no difference, statistically speaking, as to whether people recognize you as a transgender person or not, which suggests there's a very high comorbidity between transgenderism, whatever that mental state may be, and suicidality. That has nothing to do with how society treats you.
Do you think it could be because of they're bullied at school?
No, I don't think that. I do not think that the discrepancy. I do not think the discrepancy. First of all, I'm against bullying of any sort. Okay, the idea that somebody would beat somebody up is terrible. Okay, as somebody who's viciously bullied in high school, I'm not a fan of bullying. But the idea that the normal suicide rate across the United States is 4%. The suicide rate in the transgender community is 40%. The idea that 36% more transgender people are committing suicide because people are mean to them is ridiculous. It's not true, and it's not backed by any science that anyone can cite. It is pure conjecture. In fact, it's not even true that bullying causes suicide, according to a lot of studies. For example, in the black community, where the idea is supposedly that America is a racist society, blacks are bullied a lot. Okay, in the black community has significantly lower suicide rates than in the white community. In fact, in third world countries, the suicide rate is significantly lower than in first world countries. Suicide actually seems to be a privilege of the upper classes, if you actually look at it from a financial perspective. So the idea that suicidality is directly a result of people like me saying, no, men are not women and women are not men, it's not true. It's also...
So you think it doesn't impact their identity at all, or their depression, or how they feel about themselves?
I think the idea that you're going to sacrifice the entire society's proper definition of sex because you think that there is in legal terms, somebody with an eggshell skull, meaning that somebody who has a pre-existing condition that makes them more susceptible to criticism, that is not a way to run a society. You can't sacrifice truth because some people are going to actually suffer because of the truth. Plus, there's no evidence whatsoever that the suicide rate would go down in the transgender community in any marked way if people just started pretending that men were women and women were men. We're trying that experiment now. We'll find out whether... And then it becomes, okay, so how do we define life? And the answer to me is you define life by the same way that you would define life if you found it on Mars, right? If you found a single-celled organism on Mars, it's a life, right? I know, as somebody who has one baby and another on the way, you know, that what's in there is not a random piece of tissue. At the very least, even if you don't believe it's a life yet, it's certainly a potential human life, and that seems to be more valuable than your convenience. And there's something nasty and cruel and degrading about the idea that you get to decide whether something is a life or not based on whether it's convenient to you or because it's in your body. By the way, this is exactly it truly is amazing, actually, how history repeats itself. The argument in favor of abortion is exactly the same as the argument in favor of slavery. Exactly the same, right? You're on my land. I get to decide. It's up to me to decide whether you're a person or property. It's up to me, right? What are you going to say? It's on my land. What are you going to do about it? So when you have women who say it's in my womb, I get to decide based on what I feel today. I look into my heart, and I decide whether this is a child or not. Well, it turns out that in human history, there's a long and inglorious chain of people who said, I get to decide whether this person is a person or not. And it never ends with anything but mass death. So if you want to be that person who says, okay, that's not a human, I'm just going to flush it down the toilet because it's personal convenience. You can always tell, by the way, who is losing an argument by who's using the euphemisms. When it comes to abortion, the left uses nothing but euphemisms. Abortion, terminate the pregnancy, pro-choice. They never say, oh, no, what I would really prefer to do is go in there with some steel instruments, cut that baby apart, and suck its brain into a sink. Right? For some odd reason, they don't like talking like that. I can't imagine why. So, you know, I've never been a fan of pussyfooting around this particular issue. I think that it would be well worthwhile for whoever the Republican nominee is. One won't do it, but it would be nice if somebody would go onto a stage with Hillary Clinton and say, your stated position is that this child, then reach into his breast pocket and pull out a picture of a child at 30 weeks and say that this child can be murdered at the whim of the mother. This is your stated position. You believe that this is not a human, right? This is a piece of flesh. It's a piece of random flesh. This makes you a bad person, right? It does. It makes you a bad person. My wife's 30 weeks pregnant right now. That baby's kicking the hell out of her. I promise you, that ain't a random piece of flesh in there. That's my child and it's her child. And anybody who says differently ought to be caned. It's disgusting. And just to clarify for the Donald Trump voters, that's not literal. People shouldn't actually be caned for their opinions.
Is this on? I'm Mackenzie, and I go to Carpenter High School. And I often get asked questions about abortion all the time. Mm-hmm. And it's really difficult for me to come back with, you know, my answer. And people always ask, well, what if the woman is raped? What do you do? What would you say in that case?
Yeah, so what I always say with regard to rape, for example, is that if a woman is raped, we should find her rapist, we should track him down, and we should kill him, right? Or castrate him. These are my two options. Pick one. Whichever one you please, right? Either one of those is okay. Also, it's bad to kill babies. That's my answer. They're completely unrelated. The two topics are completely unrelated. The source of the pregnancy and whether that's a human life in there are two completely unrelated topics, right? It's a very difficult emotional issue. Which is why my personal view of abortion is that when the mother's life is in danger, then abortion is appropriate. That's my exception. Not the health of the mother, the life of the mother. And for me, that includes suicidality, for example. So if a woman is suicidal and she's going to kill herself because she doesn't want to bear this child, then abortion is appropriate. But other than that, these are two separate issues, right? Because rape is wrong, and so is killing babies, it turns out. Two things can both be wrong. They're not equally wrong. You know, in fact, it depends which way you view it. But the fact is that what they want to do is they also, let's be real about this, what the left wants to do is pick the outlier and then use it to justify all the rest of the abortions. Okay, 99% of the abortions in this country have nothing to do with rape. Nothing to do with rape. They have to do with people having irresponsible sex. They have to do with convenience. They have to do with age. They have to do with they don't like whether it's a boy or a girl. So what they like to do is they like to take the one outlier case and the one that tugs at the heartstrings, and then say, well, let's just make abortion legal in all circumstances based on that. How about this? I'll make an agreement with the left. Let's outlaw all rape except for rape. Now, are they happy? Of course not. Right? Of course not, because they're not really talking about rape. They're talking about how they want all abortions to be legal, and they're using a marginal example as the rule in order to make sure that abortion is legal across. You should say that to them. If they say rape, you should say, listen, how about this? We'll make a deal. All the rapes, all of the pregnancies that do not spring from rape must be carried through to term. Now, are you happy? They won't be happy, I promise you. And that's how you expose them. That's how you say, well, then it really isn't about the rape, is it? You're just using that as an excuse. Hey.
It was actually funny. 3 nights ago, I was watching this video of you destroy Piers Morgan. And I was like, wow, I really want Ben to come here. And I found out today that you're here, so I'm really happy about that. So first, I'd like to say that it seems like the abortion argument only became a women's right issue after the argument from science failed for them. I'm only 21, but it seems to me like the argument, from what I remember, it started off as being science-based with like a human at conception. It's just a zygote, like a zygote of a monkey, a fish, a dolphin, whatever. And I remember like seeing images in middle school of them showing like the early development and showing how like, oh, there's no difference here. So, but then through like research embryology, we find out like the DNA genetic template is there, human, like what you're going to be, it's there from the beginning, it says it all. So to my question, in a society today where specifically women have been so successfully convinced that an abortion isn't to be frowned upon, how can we convince young women to not get abortions when the voice of abortions aren't bad seems to be louder than the voice of like personal responsibility and like basic morality?
So, I mean, I think that the first thing is that, again, people blind themselves to answers they don't want to see. And it's our job to break through that. So I've spoken about this. I hate euphemisms with regard to abortion. Abortion is filled with euphemisms. The woman's right to choose. It's just terminating a pregnancy. No, you are killing a human life in the womb. And we should describe in graphic detail exactly what happens when that happens. Okay, when you're talking about a middle to late stage fetus that is developed, you're talking about, in many cases, the actual dismemberment of a human being in the womb. You're talking about crushing skulls and sucking brains into sinks. You're talking about torturing a child in the womb and then killing it. And that has to be brought out because people need to feel the gut-wrenching nature of what it is that is being conducted. They also need to be shown as many pictures as possible of what a baby looks like in the womb, because there is still you can make the intellectual argument for an embryo having the same moral value as a 7-month-old fetus, and I think that that's a pretty good argument, actually. But I think that the emotional argument is seeing a picture of the 7-month-old fetus. And when you know that you can tell the sex of your baby at 10 weeks, which you can, then it's very difficult to argue that this is not an independent human being with an independent DNA, with independent blood type. The more scientific knowledge that we put out there, the worse it gets for the left. And this is why this is one of the few issues where the right is actually moving in the right direction in terms of the polls. If you look at the abortion statistics and how many people actually believe in the pro-choice position, it's been declining steadily over the last 15 years, and it's going to get a lot worse because the better we can see into the womb, the more difficult it is for the pro-choice left to suggest that this is not a human life, it's just a cluster of cells.
Thank you.
Thanks.